Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos, and this week, for the second week in a row, we're remembering the rather wonderful, the certainly delightful, and the undeniably talented late Kit Hesketh-Harvey, who died on the 1st of February 2023 at the what seems to me far too young age of 65. I fear that we've been robbed of so many more years of wonderful things from this wonderful person. And I know of what I speak because I had the pleasure of meeting Kit Hesketh-Harvey on a number of occasions and interviewing him 3 times about 3 different aspects of his career. In the last episode, you heard 2 interviews with Kit, one where we were talking about his translation of Offenbach's light, vivacious, wonderful mid-19th century operetta La Belle Hélène, which he had renamed Troy Boy, and of course an earlier conversation with him and Richard Sisson, who performed as the Widow in their wonderful 30-year spanning career as Kit and the Widow. So last week you heard the lighter, brighter, funnier side of Kit, and it showed his versatility on the stage and off. But this week we're going to expand the illustration of his versatility by rehearing a conversation I had with him in 2012 about his new translation of La Traviata, a classic opera. And as you'll hear from this conversation, this brought out in him the passion, perhaps even the more serious side of Kit, as he took the opera seriously, even though he kept it light-hearted. He could do no other. But it shows his incredible skills at being able to update a classic, one might almost say staid piece of musical theatre in the broadest sense, as opera is, and bring it absolutely slap-bang up-to-date into 21st century Britain. And I quote here from a review by Paul Kilby from the 2012 production that says, "The libretto is radically but sensitively adapted by director Kit Hesketh-Harvey, moving the action into a seedy London club called La Traviata, where the raunchy singer Violetta is the star attraction. But despite all the updating, the production takes care to preserve the sincerely grand operatic core to the piece." And the reviewer goes on to say, "And that odd section where a carnival passes by Violetta's window, usually a moment which sticks out strangely, was able in this production to be given a proper po-mo workout," that's postmodern. In fact, the reappearance of a burlesque troupe at this point encapsulated the opposing elements of the opera very effectively. This was not just a gimmicky production, but also one which engaged thoughtfully with the original text. Now, I think that's a very perceptive review of the show, which I went to see. I'm not a great fan of opera, but this was an excellent adaptation and I enjoyed it immensely, in no small part due to Kit's not just clever, but his thoughtful and sensitive, those words from the review, adaptation. And that shows a completely different side of his personality and also his theatrical creativity, because he was, as I said last week, a renaissance man of the theatre. As I've said before, it was my privilege to speak to him on 3 occasions, and I think you'll be able to hear the connection between us in this third conversation, which was the last I had with him formally for Musical Talk, and I just wish I had had the chance to talk to him on many, many more occasions. In fact, I sometimes dream that it would just be lovely to sit down in a room with him and record weekly episodes of a separate podcast called Kit Hesketh-Harvey. But these things are not to be. But what we can do is revel in what we have, and this is the third of the great interviews that I had with Kit Hesketh-Harvey about his 2012 production and adaptation of La Traviata. And just for added fun, you'll be able to hear one of the singers performing in the background as we recorded this conversation. The wonderful Kit Hesketh-Harvey. Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Kit, it's a real pleasure to meet you here again.
It's
Thank
a
you
huge
so much
pleasure to be here, heavens above.
But let's talk about success upon success, because last year you bought The World, your Troy boy, and the world liked it.
The world was very kind about it. I mean, it had the inestimable advantage that it was a translation I'd done before for the English National Opera, so it had been road tested with the great Dame Felicity as Helen of Troy, and so I was working with material I knew very well, and also it had the advantage that it was an opera that people didn't mind one tampering with, because it was kind of on the edges of operetta, and it was designed as a fun piece anyway. And this young, spirited, enthusiastic cast entered absolutely into the vibe.
And I should say.
People were very, very nice about it, to the point that Merry Opera asked me to come back and do something else, with a proviso that it'd be one of the top 5 operas. I won't tell you what the top 5 operas are, according to my list and the artistic director, Matthew Quirks, slightly at odds on that. But clearly we weren't going to be doing Tristan, and so we thought about Mozart, and then he said Traviata, and I've never done a Verdi, and Traviata really is up there as my top favourite opera. So,
is it?
Yeah.
So can I ask you, what is your visceral connection with the story, which is The Lady of the Camellias?
The Lady of the Camellias, La Dame aux Camélias, which then became La Traviata. I think it's just the sheer beauty of the music. You can hear Alfredo in the background going through his paces with a repetitor. And it's that luscious Italian lyricism. And also, a story of such agonizing pain that we know from the very go that she's dying and that this love affair is doomed, and yet it flowers with all the passion and the music of which Verdi was capable, which he himself was feeling at the time when he wrote it. And it's the story that we can all connect with, because we all know somebody who's died. There's been this stupendously good production at the Royal Opera House, which sets it in, a vast palazzo in the early 19th century, which is where Verdi set it. Clearly, in a room above a pub, you can't do that, and particularly on the tiny, tiny budget that we have, I think a design budget of £2,000, which wouldn't pay for one sequin at the Royal Opera House.
Petite in budget terms.
It is petite in budget terms. But I thought, well, let's work with the room. It used to be an old music hall. Yeah, in the sort of Edwardian period. And let's set it in the contemporary equivalent of music hall, all over London, popping up like mushrooms, and largely led, curiously, by the Australians, is this great burlesque revival going on in the cabaret subculture, which tends to colonise these fine old peeling rooms and bring back the ghostly magic, tongue-in-cheek and at one removed, and sort of meta-theatrically or postmodernistically, or however you like to term it. If we are setting it in Shoreditch 2012, which is what we are, we're taking it away from Paris, we're taking it away from courtesans, and we're taking it away from that sort of glorious Covent Garden splendour. Let's find a contemporary equivalent. So the Traviata in this is the name of the club. It's called La Traviata,
very clever,
which means the fallen one. And clearly, she can't be dying of consumption. We've more or less, thank God, knocked consumption on the head. But she has a brain tumour, and that's what we discover from the very, very outset.
And she knows it.
And she knows it. And only 2 of the other cast know it, but it's her secret. And she works not as a courtesan, because sadly the era of the courtesan has passed, died on its back with Pamela Harriman, I think. But
wasn't always on the back. If you think
So we've made her into the contemporary equivalent, in my eyes, of a courtesan, which is one of the sort of glorious Dita von Teese burlesque dancers, feted and adored by the subculture. Erotic and alluring and triumphant and reigning in the REIGN sense,
yes.
Not in the
British weather sense.
The British weather sense. but clearly somebody who lives life on the edge. So we've set it in a burlesque club, and we've built up the character of Gaston, who's kind of like an MC to it all. He's the Joel Grey figure and the acerbic commentator on the story. And we can't have Alfredo as an aristocrat not allowed to marry burlesque dancers, because these days aristocrats, such as there are, marry burlesque dancers all the time. And there's no sort of forbiddenness about that. So there's a secret in Act 2, which is Al's secret, which is not until his father comes to put an end to the relationship do we discover that Al is in fact second-generation Muslim. And so clearly that is a forbidden thing. A Muslim boy would not be allowed to marry a Western burlesque dancer. And so that seemed to erect the right sort of barriers in a contemporary way. And in Shoreditch, you've got the city where Al works at the bottom of the road, you've got Brick Lane where all the Muslim community is halfway up the road, and at the top of the road you've got all these clubs of the Hoxton Shoreditch nightlife.
Well, it's the perfect cheek by jowl British London environment, isn't it? It's a London community. A bit of everyone can mix in those grey areas.
Which is Hoxton. And is also actually the Mary Opera Company. We have all shapes and sizes and races and hues in our small company of 13 members. Because one of our Violetta, we've got two Violettas working in rotation, comes from Poland. We've made her Polish. The other Violetta comes from New Zealand. Buddy's Irish by descent, so we've made her Donegal Irish. And try to work with the actual actors we've got, actor-singers we've got. And that I hope will not only bring in a sense of immediacy, and there won't be a yawning proscenium arch and a vast set in between you and the emotion, but because at the Gatehouse it's an audience of 100 and nobody is more than 10 yards from a performer.
It's a very intimate venue.
Very, very intimate. And when you've got 13 trained operatic voices going at you full blast, it sounds bigger than Covent Garden. It really does, and that is thrilling and exciting. So what you can also do is be more supple and subtle with the acting, and it's almost like the luxury of film. You can see the actors' faces so closely that
a
twitch is meaningful. And because these guys are young, they're all in their sort of hovering around the 30 mark. They're 4 or 5 years out of their opera schools, just beginning their solo careers, and two of them are clearly way ahead in their solo careers, and we're very lucky to have them.
Catch them while you can.
Catch them while you can. Then you also get the characters being the ages they're supposed to be. That Alfredo is a young, hot-headed boy of 22 or 23. Well, he's 20. Our boy is 25.
Well over the hill.
Well over the hill. Violetta's slightly older, at about the age of sort of 30, but both our Violettas are 30. So you've got that immediacy of realism and that great presence of emotion, which sometimes gets lost in a vast house.
And indeed did. You know the story probably better than I, but on the very first night when Verdi opened, it was jeered because of the cast. It was the original The Fat Lady Sings.
She wasn't quite right for it, and nobody.
She was Violetta and a Viennetta.
Nobody could believe that she was dying of consumption at all. But
well, a different kind of consumption entirely, I think.
She was morbidly obese. But I can't believe that Traviata wasn't successful in its first night, and I think Verdi himself took rather too bleak a view of it, and you read other contemporary accounts, and the music was quite rightly praised. And the construction of it is a beautifully constructed piece. We've turned the three acts into two halves, as we had to do with Troy Boy. But it's pretty swift. And we'll be doing all of what Verdi wrote, and bar one aria that's been cut. And the first act is an hour and 5. The second act is 50. So
that's a very
which is again, shorter, I hope will bring in a younger audience with tiny attention spans, and also the fact that it's in a burlesque club, which should be fun to go to, and we're hoping that this burlesque club will be fun to go to. Will excite people and give them the kind of erotic thrill that a courtesan salon would have had in early 19th century Paris. if we had time travel. But I hope I'm just working with what we've got constructively and positively rather than trying to create something we can't.
I'm absolutely bought into this lovely contemporary sense you've given to it. You've really put a lot of thought into recontextualising it in a modern sense. Once again, Verdi, as I'm sure you know, wished it to be contemporary at the time. I was stunned to discover that the La Traviata was written a year after the book on which it was based was published. It's as though it's absolutely contemporary of its time.
Exactly.
I gather when it was first performed, they weren't allowed to do it as a contemporary show. They had to sort of put the distance of
They
time.
had to put the distance because it was considered too rude.
That's right. So you are living Verdi's dream.
Well, I hope that I'm, and the grand old boy isn't spinning in his grave, but we're also slightly reorchestrating it in the sense that we don't have a huge Covent Garden orchestra. We've got a band of 6, and as Troy Boy proved, Nick, who does the arrangements, is brilliant, and it didn't kind of need it. Here we're adding colours and textures that will suggest contemporary burlesque. We've got an accordion in for the Libiamo, which of course is a karaoke number because it's such a great big lollipop. And we've got guitars going in the silly Spanish section. I mean, what tends to get overlooked in the bigger productions is that there are these big cabaret set pieces which have absolutely nothing to do with the action. There's, you get gypsies and matadors for no reason at all. And the only place where you get gypsies and matadors for no reason at all is in burlesque clubs, where the sheer delight is in the folly of it.
Or if you're opening Act 2 in Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Oh, that one, yes. Masquerade! But,
you saw through my thin
I'm sorry, it's the thin
veneer.
veneer. And then there's the bacchanal of her sort of nightmare vision as she's dying at the end, which we're doing as a Mexican Day of the Dead with saucepan lids. And there's an alto sax at one point. So again, we're kind of putting it in inverted commas. Some of these Verdi tunes, the Libiamo in particular, the Brindisi, is so bloody famous that you have to treat it like a warhorse. And it is treated like a great big joke in our production. It's karaoke night at the Traviata, and everyone's invited to come up and sing something. And our leading tenor says, "Okay, I'm going to do a bit of Verdi," and so we're playing with the story in that sense.
Meta theatre again.
Yeah, meta theatre again.
If I may, I'd like to explore just a little bit with you, because obviously this is opera, and it's part of this new trend in the last 5 years of small opera. I'd like to call it chamber opera, but that almost makes it too formal. It's accessible.
I've heard boutique opera, which I think is very funny, because it has that sense of postmodern fun about it. Car boutique. But yes, and I think it has inestimable advantages, which are many. A, that you can use young singers who are just setting out. You don't have to have whopping great stars in there who are too expensive.
In a both literal and
both literal and figurative sense. B, you can reinvent, because necessity is the mother of invention, and generally you can update. I mean, the La Bohème, obviously, that Opera Up Close did and scooped the Olivier Award, quite rightly, I thought, off the big houses, was just brilliant in that regard. C, it's cheap. I mean, everyone said about Troy Boy, this is the best value opera in London. It was 15 quid a ticket, as opposed to 10 times at the Covent Garden for the same show.
And you're in with them.
And you're in with them. Yes, I mean, you're that far away, and you can hear the beauty of their voices. I think it's all tremendously exciting, particularly as, Covent Garden prices are just stratospheric now. I mean, ridiculous.
You have to be a banker with appropriate bonuses.
Exactly, to go there. And that rules out an awful lot of the potential audience. A, music lovers who simply can't afford those prices of any age, but B, the young. And I think if opera is to survive, the young have to come and see shows about them in a context that they understand at a price that they can afford.
But can I ask a question? I mean, how meaningful, and this is, there's no right or wrong answer to this, but how meaningful now are the terms grand opera, chamber opera, musical theatre? As some musical theatre becomes ever more literate, and indeed ever more musical, in the lyrical sense, if I can muddle my phrasing, and opera becomes, or of this vanguard, if you like, of new trends of bringing it to the people, boiling it down and making it shine, boiling it down and then buffing it up, I suppose, in a sense. Is there a genuine difference?
I think what's happened is that a dichotomy that did exist artificially is now being blown away. And if you go back to the 19th century, there was no distinction. and the early 19th century, early 20th century inverted commas musicals, the Tudor Prince and so forth, were actually more or less operas by any other name, and Showboat isn't actually that far away from opera. And even in the grand opera houses, I mean, we've got the Enchanted Owl opening at the Met this week with the great Jeremy Sams rewriting, which is doing exactly what the early 19th century producers did, which was to find a story and chuck in whatever tune they could find from whatever show was popular at the time. So kind of like jukebox opera. And now it's being done on a grand scale at the Met with Met ticket prices. I just love the way that those very academic distinctions, which to a lot of actors and singers are artificial. Thomas Allen has long flirted with music theatre. He's now directing a Magic Flute I translated for Scottish Opera this summer, Dame Kyrie does her West Side Story, but it works the other way around as well, and people like Colm Wilkinson, when they're singing God It's High, are operatic voices and work on us in an operatic sense.
So obviously, but forgive me, Musical Talk speaks very directly to the lover of the musical theatre.
Right.
Whilst accepting that's a very broad brush. And funnily enough, also includes cabaret, and burlesque is merely a branch of that.
Exactly.
So I have to ask, forgive me, what are the hooks for the musical listener? They're going to say, this isn't just for the lovers of opera. This is very clearly for the lovers of musical theatre.
I think it's for the lovers of
you said music theatre.
Music theatre, which I think just covers all bases, doesn't it? But there's also lovers for cabaret, because it is a cabaret setting, and also lovers for cabaret with a capital C, because I've lent very heavily on our folk memory of the Canberra Ned musical and film, that La Traviata is effectively the Kit Kat Club, and she's a dancer at the Kit Kat Club, and a guy comes in and falls in love with her.
Which is a trope that's worked through
opera, right the way down,
and musical theatre,
and Marlene Dietrich musicals and films. It's all the way through.
And even bizarrely, you could say the Guys and Dolls.
Yeah.
Adelaide is a singer and a
I
mean, their relationship has already started. But
yes, it's also a very useful dramatic device in that it justifies the music.
Yes.
As you rather than
diegetic or non-diegetic?
Strange people bursting into song for no reason at all. If their job is to be a singer, then of course they will burst into song, and you go along with that. But having tampered so thoroughly with the big chorus scenes, when we get back to Violetta's flat, and it is duets, trios, quartets between people on extremes of emotion, and Verdi has written such exquisite music for it, then you let well alone, you don't tamper, and you just hope you've done as clear a translation as possible, that's as singable as possible and doesn't interfere with the astonishing lines that he wrote musically.
Brings me, if I may say, onto your, and I'm not using a Spoonerism here, your shining wit. But seriously, forgive me, you are one of the wittiest men in London.
Oh, well, bless you, darling. I don't know about that.
But seriously, forgive me, you bring a lightness, a deftness of touch, and a lightness of spirit to almost everything you do, it seems to me. And certainly your lyrics for Troy Boy were as light as a soufflé in some senses, and funnier than a soufflé too. This is not in itself a hilarious story.
No,
but
it's not.
How did you feel able in your translation? How once again, way back to how close do you have to be to the story? Could you lighten it at points? Did you feel actually I need to step away from this? Am I working?
I think
with the music.
You take the cue from the music. Verdi will occasionally put in a little light aside, and oddly enough, Violetta in the last moments, when she's being brave, she knows she's dying, her lover has just discovered that she's dying, she does, and she has an interview with her protector, the Baron, as we're calling him, she does crack little jokes, and the jokes are there in the music, the lightness of the music, and it's that bravery which is so infinitely touching and makes it less maudlin. And the fact that into the middle of all this great tide of emotion, Verdi will chuck in a Matador number, or in the last act a carnival number. I think you just have to ride those for as light as you can, just to make the contrast, because then the last moments hit you with even more of a wallop. But no, I mean, there aren't great jokes in this translation at all. I mean, the jokes are that there is a bunch of gypsies for no reason.
Incongruity of it.
And also in Gaston, as I say, this MC character who introduces the story and says this is just a story about one girl. You know, every artist appearing at La Traviata has her own story. This is just one of them. And he's kind of like our slightly androgynous, sexually voracious compare that you will find at La Soirée or La Clique or whatever.
Metrosexual?
Metrosexual. Who's the boy who's doing it at the moment at La Soirée in a cod Spanish accent? Very, very funny. But, you know, I am famous for my promiscuity. But but it's that character. So, yeah, hopefully one's lightened the heffalump of those moments as they can be in a grand opera house.
Did you find that difficult when you were translating it, though? I mean, did you find it a grapple?
Yeah.
You did?
More so than this absolutely more so than Troy. This has been the hardest thing I've ever had to translate.
Now, why? That's really interesting.
Because I'm happier with with Latinate rhythms where you can crack Gilbertian rhymes and make fairly highly constructed jokes. There's no scope for that in this. Verdi writes an awful lot in 3-time, and the sheer lyricism of the phrasing, you can't interrupt that for a joke. So in fact, writing straight is damn sight harder. There you just have to write singable, you know, and make sure that your vowels are right. You're not making the poor girl sing a new sound on her top A or whatever.
And now the emotion, now you've said, of course, the music takes you where you need to go, but that isn't true entirely, is it? Because it was that guidance. I absolutely refute the idea that lyrics are not important. I just...
Oh, me too, yes, I'm glad about that. And I'm working very hard on their diction, so we can hear what they're saying.
Always nice to see a young man's diction. But I do apologise, not very rude of me. My mother would be blushing.
Sir.
I didn't bring her with me. But seriously, and indeed seriously, you know, how easy is it for you to meet the emotional requirements of the words? You know, you're not dying of consumption.
I'm not dying of consumption. I've been in love, though, many times, and I think you just have to recall that. And I'm sitting here. It sounds indulgent, but so is the cast, and watching cast who aren't on stage, and indeed the actress and actor on stage are sitting there with tears pouring down their faces. It is a very, very touching story. You know, it's about universals. It's the Romeo and Juliet story. You know, two people who aren't allowed to love who should be, and who get set up and partied artificially and come back together again in the end. It's, you know, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy finds girl at the end, but it's too late.
Yes.
And it's a heartbreaking story. It's a heartbreaking story.
And
so yeah, you just have to dredge up from the well of your own emotion.
Love and loss.
Love and loss.
Yes.
Yeah, despite my blithe exterior, underneath this beats a human heart.
Very splendid. I gave mine up a while ago. I didn't put sixpence in the meter and it stopped working. Showing my age there, I'm afraid. So how can people see this?
Very cheaply.
The good answer in this day and age.
They get on a tube to Archway and they walk up the hill. Or get on a tube to Highgate and walk down the hill. They pay 15 quid, which for this lineup is astonishing. And as I say, we've got some, you know, one of our singers we've had to wrest from the English National. One we've had to wrest from Covent Garden. One has just had her audition at Covent Garden. I mean, these are singers going places.
Oh, indeed.
And you buy a packet of crisps and a pint down below at Wetherspoons. God bless Wetherspoons! Go upstairs and there it is. And it runs from the 8th to, I don't know. 3rd, is it 3rd of March? At Highgate, at the Gatehouse Theatre.
That's fantastic, and we'll come back to that in just a minute. But you were saying that this is the emotion, this is the heart, this is love, this is loss. But you've also just done pantomime.
Yeah, wasn't that a contrast? Jack and the Beanstalk at Guildford for 66 performances, which makes 2,640 custard pies. Don't think I didn't count every one that hit me in the face. I was giving my dastardly Dick Flesh Creep, last of the House of Flesh Creep.
Who's the giant sort of agent on Earth?
Yes. He's the rent collector and the general fetcher of meat for his maw. Opposite the fabulous and great Bonnie Langford, who was giving her fairy fuchsia on the other side of the stage. And Jack and the Beanstalk, great, because you get a fab cow, you get a wonderful giant, and...
So we're not talking about Bonnie Langford.
Oh, no, absolutely. No, Bonnie Langford, I will defend to the last. Bonnie is just wonderful. She's spunky, she's gutsy, she takes the mickey out of herself, she's infinite. I mean, she was a dancing sperm, for God's sake. I mean, she's got so much so much experience, and she's been there before.
So flesh creep. Now,
Flesh creep.
and I think you said rather splendidly before we started recording that you sent many a child home weeping.
That was my task. I have the second opening speech after Bonnie has come on in her puff of glitter as fairy sparkle. I come on in the green light with a searing flash of green, and my task was, to me, my personal quest was to make as many children cry as I could in the opening. My record was 9 within about 10 seconds.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. And the more children I had howling and carried out, the thought, well, the better I've done the job.
How do you approach panto? I mean, you haven't done you've written for panto.
I've written for panto, but I've done
Barbican Can, as we've had. It's a wonderful song. In all its 12 minutes.
In all its 12 minutes
original.
I've done panto, performed panto exactly 3 times. The first time was in The Footlights, where I met the widow. I was the handsome prince and he was a dancing bat. The second Times don't change. It went then to 1985, where I gave my rat, or whatever it was, opposite Kate Rebett as Alice Fitzwarren. So I met my wife. And I was fully expecting 26 years later that something cataclysmic would happen at this panto, but mercifully it didn't. No, I remain in violet. Well, in green, actually.
But not in violet. Tell me, do you like pantomime? Because it is hard work.
It is physically incredible. I lost a stone. I lost an inch and a bit off my waist. No, it's doing it at 10:30 in the morning. That's the real brutal thing.
They're packing in the matinees, you mean?
They're packing in the matinees. I mean, of course, when every theatre in the land makes its treasure chest for the year, and you don't begrudge them a cent of that, and more power to them. And Guildford is beautifully run, and backstage is so friendly that I can't think of a nicer place to have done it. But my God, I was grateful for a bed in my dressing room. And you just have to sort of... I realised about a week in, it's like doing children's television. You just have to hang your brain up at the stage door and go out and do Tis Was. And then you love it, and it's great fun. And we couldn't have had a nicer company. We had the great Royce Mills as Dane. Yeah, lovely Royce, one of the...
Voices of the Daleks in the 1980s.
Voices of the Daleks. Now sounds like Margaret Rutherford. He's fabulous. And very, very funny. And we had a boy called Lloyd Hewitt, who's been there 3rd or 4th year, button stroke, whatever. He was Simple Simon this year. He rang me last night to tell me being cast in a West End lead in the new Ray Cooney thing that Giles Brandreth is involved in. I'm not quite sure, but anyway. So he's on the up. He's a very, very brilliant physical comedian and very good timer of jokes, and couldn't be more sweet. So, I mean, we were all completely happy, not a crossword for the whole run, which was just brilliant.
But I tell you what has been absolutely fascinating, that little nugget that you said, of course, but actually, because with him you're a very cerebral comic man, and your jokes work at a very high level. And then there's the custard pie. So you are saying that you're almost working at the emotional comic level, and indeed the emotional frightening level, rather than the intellectual.
Absolutely, that's what I had to learn to do.
I was going to say, how easy is that for you?
Not at all. It took me about 12 performances to find my stride, and 12 audiences. Too clever by bloody half. Yes. Yeah. And also you have to learn, because dramaturgy is meaningless in panto, you have to learn to step entirely out of character. For the custard pie sequence, I was just not even particularly the villain. I was rather nice at that point. Being this Cambridge ass, receiving an awful lot of custard pies from it was back to the absolute traditions of panto, the reverse, the Feast of Fools, when those who should be in charge are trussed up and mocked. And so I went off into my own little drama history moment in my head as the next custard pie arrived. And then, and befriend your custard piers, and then it kind of works.
Yes.
But it's very odd to learn how to approach the audience in a different way. And under the radar, over the radar, or with all your defences down rather than all your defences up.
And the singing? Because obviously you sing divinely.
I sing divinely, like a lark, like a linnet. I had precisely 12 bars of food, glorious food.
Oh, was that it?
God knows how they hired me, or why they hired me. Very glad they did. But no, I mean, by the time you chucked in all the chorus numbers and the ghost number and the sing-along number, there's not really an awful lot of space for anybody else. And Bonnie Langford has done her fabulous Act 2 opening, which was Dancing Through Life from Wicked. Then no, 12 bars.
And can I ask just one final question? When did it end? Because Panto, I'm sure you'll have spotted in your 3 perfectly timed attempts at it, and when I say attempt, successes at it, you'll have spotted that the timings have changed. Because when I was a boy, Panto started on Boxing Day and went on to February, possibly March, and now is over within. You're lucky if it lasts 2 weeks.
We were
January.
2 days after 12th night. It wasn't even 2 weeks. So January the 8th, but we did start right at the start of December. So it's just shifted backwards, and that's kind of right because there's nothing more sort of turkey leftovers than trying to pretend it's Christmas on January the 29th. I mean, that's just grim. Nobody should have to do that, even in Dartford.
I love January and February Panto, though. I lament its passing, I must tell you. It was my February treat.
Really?
I'm a February child, you see.
Oh, I see. Oh,
Yeah,
God. So you got up on stage. You got
Spoiled.
up on stage. No, that must be even grim. I can imagine 10:30 in the morning in February in Dartford. Oh, please.
Well, there are people who do it every day. Taking us back, then, from the ridiculous to the sublime, if I may take it, let's just talk briefly about the score. Because at Troy Boy, you rather splendidly found La Belle Hélène's song.
Oh, God, yes, didn't we?
It was a real treat to hear it, and it was a fabulous song as well.
It was a very good song.
Sort
We
of
should
almost
just
feminist
nailed to the
anthem.
mast, wasn't she, waving her Greek flag around,
Absolutely.
trying to rescue the economy. Too late. But no, this Traviata is absolutely what he wrote, and we haven't done any musicological digging up or tried to be clever with that because, quite honestly, what he wrote is so perfectly balanced, you wouldn't want to tamper with it. And his gear changes from the sort of great chorus scenes to the intimate scenes are beautifully judged. Beautifully
They are.
judged.
It's not as you say, a lorry driver's gear change.
Or a pantomime in that sense.
that
There is a complete justification for every musical decision, and Verdi was one of the tops.
Well, possibly the top, really, in some senses. I'm fascinated by that because what you sent me there is that not only does Verdi take the emotional narrative, but he's also reflecting a genuine emotional narrative that you might find if this story had been true. So how have your eyes opened to Verdi getting this intimate into his work? I mean,
I haven't read a great deal up about it because I prefer just to take the text and the score and work with what's there rather than try and shoehorn in odd bits of history. But when he wrote it, he was in an illicit relationship and very much in love, and it was a very domestic love affair. They kind of fled from the madding crowd and went up a hill and lived in this villa together. And that sense you get that,
which is reflected absolutely in the story.
Exactly, in the
middling idyll.
The middling idyll. The domestic scenes and the death scene in particular are set in a very simple parlour. We can't do a huge set, so we've got the most basic of sets and let hopefully the acting, the physical appeal of the actors and the singing, obviously the singing, do the work for us that a set would do if you were Zeffirelli filming it.
So as Lawrence Hart says, it's sort of live on love and food for thought almost.
Yeah. It's and oh boy, it's a tearjerker. I mean, it really is. I'm still, hardened into 2.5 weeks rehearsal. Can still, with some startlement, feel something running down my cheeks. Virtually every time, absolutely every time. Yeah, even with a piano in a rehearsal room in Pimlico, because these singers are really great. They really are great.
It's almost painful to say so, but I'm going to anyway, because that's never stopped me before, but Verdi is certainly not green. And it's very polite of you to laugh, I'm afraid.
Old John Green, Giuseppe. Yeah, no, it is just fantastic. And I was a little circumspect about Verdi and, all that rumpty-tum stuff, and the fact you heard it churned out on hurdy-gurdies and so forth.
Did he... He heard it on hurdy-gurdy?
Well, he would have heard it on hurdy-gurdies too.
I suppose, yes.
There's that sort of...
But is that the sign of a good... I mean, it is the sign of a truly successful piece in a way.
I think so. If it can sustain that,
yes.
That's why... I used to be a Puccini boy. I think I'm coming round.
I'm better with you. I'm more with Verdi, so I'll see you there. Once again, then, how can people catch La Traviata? If I may say, because I haven't seen it yet, but I know it will be... If Troy Boy is anything to go by, you will have caught it absolutely perfectly and just pitched it correctly. Because you're directing as well, aren't you?
I'm directing, yeah, God.
You are the man of vision.
The man of vision. You can see it at the Gatehouse Theatre in Highgate, at the top of Highgate Hill, opposite Highgate School, above the pub, the Gatehouse, for 15 quid, I think, or something. I mean, it's not very much. And it's up a steep and very narrow staircase, and it runs from February the 8th to March the 3rd.
Stairs to heaven.
Stairs to heaven.
Kit, thank you so much
Tom,
for speaking to me
thank
again.
you very, very much indeed.
It will be a triumph. I look forward to
I hope
proving
so.
myself right by seeing you.
And bring along your burlesque fishnets for it.
Well, I don't leave home without them, to be honest. Musical talk. There we are. A conversation with Kit Hesketh-Harvey about his 2012 adaptation and production of La Traviata for the Merry Opera Company. And what an excellent show it was, and what a wonderful adaptation it proved to be. And in turn, what a marvellous man Kit Hesketh-Harvey was. His death on the 1st of February touched me very, very deeply. And even though I only met him a few times, I certainly feel bereaved. I feel I've lost someone from my life. And I also grieve for a life not yet finished. There was so much more that Kit could have given us all. But let us remember him fondly, as I certainly do. It is Kit, after all, who gave me my best review, because I was told by the person who kindly set up some of these interviews, after I'd finished talking to him about his show Troy Boy from 2011, that Kit had said to her subsequently about me, "Oh, he's very well informed." I don't take to compliments terribly easily, but I've always carried that around in my heart. That small sentence has meant a very great deal to me over the last decade, but those words will now mean more, as I remember the person I really liked, the delightful Kit Hesketh-Harvey, 1957 to 2023. Thank you for listening to this, the second episode of Tribute to Kit. I hope it's brought him alive for you, and I hope it helps us to realise what we've lost. Until the next episode of Musical Talk, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2023. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos.
Is it a favourite song, Birds Nest Soup? You see, you could pour
We
oil.
We should be, of course, being tuned off in Chinese for the Olympics. I mean, Ness and Dawn are in Chinese, doing Chinese menu. I don't know how I missed that trick.
Yes.
Maybe it will be by...
That would really startle
That
some
would
people.
really startle some people.
We must do that before Joan comes in, actually. That'd be hilarious. We talk with Joan Rivers and we do
Yes.
sing,
I've heard her introduction for you.
Okay, right. So
And yours for her.
And so it would be very, because she's come to see the show and she's always laughing that we do the same closure all the time.
Oh.
But if we did a different version of it, she would have to probably prolapse there on the chair.
Conniptions.
Conniptions is
Do
the
you
word.
think she's still got them?
Woolly bits. Who knows? She's probably turned them into part of her face.
You sit down on the low, uncomfortable chair.
Oh, what's good for you two? Because forgive me, I will be thrusting this upon your persons.
Right.
And it's on at the moment, but that's only as a
Oh,
warm-up,
actually, I
so
better
not
not
for levels.
do any more of this.
And it'll probably be going out after the Edinburgh Fringe. So if you want to
Marvellous.
focus in any way towards your future career,
Yep.
I would like this.
one.
Sorry,
No, we don't have one. There's
This is it.
I do not believe this for 1 second. Lovely. Well, in which case, I'll probably be swinging backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
So do we.
If you say anything, if you say anything that you'd rather have not said, then do
Delete that!
Absolutely, and
No.
I will do that. I'm
Yeah.
not in the interest. I'm not in my business of causing trouble. and focus it on anything you like. I mean, I'll talk about some questions, but focus on anything you'd like to focus on. There'll be a studio link to it, so we don't need to bother with the introductions, I think.
Right.
How would you like me to address you? Is
Widow.
You're happy, or widow, without the definite article?
We could talk about that if you like.
Only if you want to, I don't intrude. What's that all right? Is there anything you want me to take out of that, apart from the obvious stuff in the middle?
Well, exactly. I mean, you know your readership, and we haven't.
And do you want me to pass it through any of your agents or anything?
No, just do your thing.
No, that's fine.
Our agents don't know our names, never mind what we...
Certainly they don't know your timetabling. Now, first of all, thank you very much. I'm genuinely grateful, particularly as I feel I've drawn you in. I'll be in the audience, and I'm going to come back and buy CDs.
If it occurs to you afterwards that there's something you need to pick up or anything during the boring bits, there are 2 really dull songs, so you can jot them down. And
well, what I was going to say, one day I'd like to interview you again a bit more fully, but only at your convenience and leisure.
Absolutely.
Well, as long as you don't think that's an imposition upon you, because that was just solid gold, if I may say.
What, like ABBA?
Very much. 2 albums, one each. You're on one. I'll leave you to it because I appreciate what you've got to do.
Great, Thos, thank you.
But I will come. Now, we are actually on.
Right.
It's the same thing as last time. If you
So
say
this
anything,
is for broadcast?
yes, if that's
okay.
okay. It's
Right.
It's a podcast.
Okay, please. Right.
And background always actually helps, to be honest. It gives it authenticity, which I like.
She's singing Handel, unfortunately, but there we go.
Each their own. Can I ask you for a level?
Yes, of course. This is my level. There we go. I'm level.
Bring myself up to it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you say anything you'd rather you hadn't said, just say.
Just say it. Could not use that.
This is not an expose.
No.
There'll be an in-studio link, so I'll just go straight into it.
Okay. Great.
Are you happy being called Kit?
Yes, absolutely. That's my name. Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Not at all. Have you thought about Traviata?
I can never swallow a whole.
Which is great, and it'd be interesting to flip. Sorry, stop. That's my phone going off. I thought I'd turn it off.
Do take anything you need to take.
Sorry, darling. I'm in the middle of an interview. Can I just come back to you?
And hopefully not a piece of cheese.
Is this St. Gabriel Hall, the entry is here?
Yes, it is. Are you called for 6 o'clock?
6:30.
6:30.
Kung Fu class.
Oh, Kung Fu. How exciting. Should we do some Kung Fu? No, that's fine. We're just finishing off. Yeah. There is a lady in there singing to the piano, but go and listen, I should. Because I think our booking here finishes at 6. I don't know quite what time we've got to, but no, that's completely wrong.
11 according to the clock.
But please, or just say, I'm sorry, we're just recording a quick, that's fine. This is Gabriel Boys Hall, yeah, fantastic.
I hope you don't mind if we just carry on for a few minutes.
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
So, and that's perfect, is that all right?
Great.
Lovely, thank you. Now, I've left it on for the moment, so is there anything else you want added in?
No, I think that absolutely covered the cause. And
thank you so much.
No, bless you. And where have you come from?
Chiswick, not that
far.
Sorry. And do you know there's a building right next to it, right here, it's sort of 1940s community centre.
Oh yeah.
I went to a 1940s revivalist event there about a year ago.
Oh, good Lord.
I know.
What, with a swing band or something?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I was there in my
morning
suit
suit
bowler hat.
Oh, it's your morning suit. You didn't actually put on the RAF uniform.
No, I leave that to... I have enough friends who prefer the uniform. I thought I'd come in suits.